The Art of Letting Go. How the wisdom of the samurai can save your life. When was the last time you ended a day feeling you had actually lived? Not that you had survived, not that you had ticked off a to-do list, but that you had truly lived with full lungs, a quiet mind, and that strange, beautiful feeling that everything was exactly where it needed to be. If you have to think too hard to answer that question, keep listening, because what I'm about to share with you completely changed the way I understand life, time, and inner peace. And there is something very specific at the end of this story that I want you to take with you today, something you can apply this very night. But to get there, I first need to tell you the story of a man who lost everything in a single night and who, upon waking the next day, music, was the freest man he had been in decades. Stay with me. This is important. We live in a strange time, a time where everyone feels insufficient, but no one knows exactly why. Everywhere you look, there is a voice telling you that you need to improve, that you must optimize yourself, that there is something in you that is broken and needs to be fixed as soon as possible. They tell you to wake up earlier, to be more productive, to think more positively, to do more, achieve more, and be more. And the truly curious thing is that you try. We all try. We add a new habit, buy the right book, download the meditation app, sign up for the course that is going to change everything. And at first there is a spark of hope, that feeling that this time it really will work, that this time you are going to become the person you want to be. And what happens next? What happens after that initial spark? 2 weeks pass, 3 weeks, the enthusiasm cools, life returns to its old rhythm, and you are left looking again at that list of incomplete habits, thinking that the problem is you, that you do not have enough discipline, that you do not have enough willpower, that you are simply not one of those people who manage to transform their lives. But what if the problem was not that? What if the problem was not that you are missing something, but that you have too much? Listen carefully to what I am going to say, because here is where everything changes. We have built an entire civilization on the idea that to improve a life, you need to add things to it: more knowledge, more tools, more strategies, more activities, more routines. But there is a tradition from thousands of years ago on the other side of the world that reached a completely opposite conclusion. A tradition that says that the path to a calmer, fuller, and more meaningful life does not involve adding. It involves eliminating. And now I want you to ask yourself this question, a simple but powerful question. How many things in your life do you have because you genuinely need them? And how many do you have because at some point someone convinced you that you needed them? Do not answer yet. Save that question, because before you reach your own answer, I need to introduce you to someone. It was the year 1580 in Kyoto, Japan. The city was a hive of commerce, art, and power. And in that city, there was a man named Hiroshi. Hiroshi was what any person of his time would have called a successful man. He owned 10,000 possessions, beautiful embroidered silk kimonos, extremely rare ceramic tea sets brought from China, scrolls with calligraphy by great masters, lacquered furniture that cost a year's wages for an ordinary artisan, jewelry, tools, collections, memories, and objects that he had been accumulating during decades of prosperous trade. He had everything his society said would make him happy, everything he was supposed to desire. And yet, Hiroshi could not sleep. His mornings began with 30 minutes choosing which of his 40 kimonos to wear. Not because he enjoyed that choice, but because each kimono had a story, a suitable occasion, a meaning he did not want to ignore. His nights were filled with anxiety. Was the tea set well stored? Was the scroll protected from humidity? Had someone entered the warehouse without permission? His mind, that mind that should have been his greatest ally, had become an endless inventory list, a manager of possessions that never rested. Does this sound familiar to you? I am not talking about kimonos or scrolls. I am talking about the modern version of the same problem. The phone that wakes you up with notifications before you have even opened your eyes. The email that already has 40 new messages before breakfast. The list of pending tasks that last night had 20 points and this morning has 22, even though you have crossed out 4. The brain that never stops, because there is always something to manage, something to remember, something you cannot afford to forget. Hiroshi lived exactly that, but his story does not end there. One summer night, a fire started in the nearby market. The fire spread fast, too fast, and before he could do anything, his great warehouse of possessions was burning. In a single night, everything he had accumulated for decades turned to ash. He should have felt devastated, destroyed, ruined. And here is what I need you to listen to, very carefully, because here is the heart of everything I am going to tell you today. While Hiroshi watched as the fire consumed his possessions, while the smoke rose into the dark sky of Kyoto, and the flames transformed into nothing all that he had protected with such zeal, he felt his chest expand, his breathing becoming deeper. That something, a huge weight he had been carrying for so long that he no longer even noticed it, had finally lifted. For the first time in years, Hiroshi could breathe. How is that possible? How can total loss produce relief? What does that say about the nature of what we call having? Stay with that question because the answer is much deeper than it seems and has everything to do with something in Japan called Danshari. The morning after the fire, a Zen monk visited Hiroshi among the rubble and taught him a principle that would forever change the way that man would see the world. The principle is called Danshari, and most people when they hear this word think it is simply about throwing things away, about cleaning the closet, about tidying the garage, but that would be staying with the shell and losing the fruit. Danshari is a deeply mental practice. The word combines 3 distinct concepts. The first is to refuse unnecessary things before they enter your life. The second is to discard what you already have, but no longer serves you. And the third, the most difficult of all, is to separate yourself from the attachment itself, not only from objects, but from the need to possess. The monk explained something to Hiroshi that he initially found impossible to believe. Every object you possess, he told him, requires a portion of your attention, even when you are not looking at it, even when you think you have completely forgotten it. Everything you have lives in some corner of your consciousness, occupying space, claiming energy, existing as a small silent responsibility that never completely disappears. Think about this for a moment. Think about that drawer in your house that is always full of things you don't really know what they are for, but you don't dare throw away either. You can feel how that drawer has a presence, how at some point, even briefly, your mind passes through it and thinks, one day I have to tidy that. That is what the monk called violence against consciousness, because human consciousness has a limited capacity, and if you fill it with objects, commitments, reminders, and possessions, there is no free space left to live. There is no space for creative thought. There is no space for real presence. There is no space to be genuinely here in this moment with the person in front of you. But there is something even more interesting that the monk shared with Hiroshi, and it is something we would rather not hear about ourselves. Most of the time, we do not accumulate because we genuinely love what we accumulate. We accumulate because we are running away from something. Buying is a way of medicating the inner void. Filling physical spaces is a way of trying to control the chaos we feel inside. When life feels uncertain and out of control, ordering, classifying, acquiring, and organizing gives us the illusion that we hold the reins, gives us the feeling that we are doing something, but it is just that, an illusion. And this leads me to a question I want you to ask yourself honestly, without judgment and without answering it right now for me, only for yourself. When was the last time you bought something? Not because you needed it, but because in that moment you felt anxiety, boredom, or a void you didn't know how to fill in any other way. There is no wrong answer. There is only an honest answer or a dishonest one. Because what the Zen masters understood centuries ago, what modern neuroscience is only just beginning to confirm, is that the act of letting go produces something in the brain very similar to what Hiroshi felt in front of the fire. When you let go of what you do not need, you not only free physical space, you free cognitive energy, you free attention, and with that freed attention, you can finally begin to see clearly what truly matters. The practice of Danshari is not limited to physical objects. It extends to the commitments you accept because you do not know how to say no, to the relationships you maintain out of habit, even though they long ago stopped nourishing each other, to the mental habits that keep you going in circles, to the internal conversations you repeat over and over again, without ever reaching any new conclusion. What is in your life right now that you know deep down no longer serves you, but you have not yet had the courage to let go of? Save that answer, because later in this story, we are going to talk about how to let it go without fear. But first, I need to tell you about something that almost all of us are terrified of, and that turns out to be the source of all true peace. When you begin to let go of things, to eliminate, to simplify, something appears that most people find deeply uncomfortable: empty space. And I say they find it uncomfortable because I lived it myself. For years, every time I had a free gap in my schedule, I felt something I can only describe as an itch in the mind, an inexplicable urge to fill it with something productive, with something useful, with something that at least served as entertainment. An empty hour felt like a wasted hour. A weekend without plans felt like a personal failure, as if being busy was proof that your life was worth something, and rest was simply a sign that you were not trying hard enough. Do you recognize that feeling? Because if you recognize it, you need to hear what I'm going to tell you now. In Japanese, there is a concept called Ma. It does not have a perfect translation into English because it names something that in our culture we do not even have well conceptualized. Ma refers to empty space, to the necessary pause, to the silence between the notes, to the white space in a painting, to the pause between two words in a conversation, and in Japanese thought. This void is not the absence of something. It is in itself a presence as real and as necessary as any object or sound that surrounds it. Think of music. Music is not just the notes that are played. Music is also the silence between the notes. If you remove the silences, if you turn all the pauses into more sound, you do not have more music, you have noise. You have a wall of sound without form, without breath, without beauty. The same happens with your life. If every moment of your day is full of activity and stimulation, if there is no space to breathe, to process, to simply be, then your life stops being a melody and becomes noise. It stops having shape, stops having depth, and you stop being able to hear yourself. But here is the real problem, and it is deeper than it seems. The fear of empty space is not simply a matter of habit or culture, it is a defense mechanism. Because when you stay in silence, when there is nothing to listen to, nothing to see, nothing to do, your own thoughts become more audible. And sometimes those thoughts say things we would rather not hear about who we are, about what we really want, about what we are avoiding. Constant noise is for many people a way of not having to face themselves. So the question is not just how to create more silence in your schedule. The deeper question is this: what is it that you fear finding when the noise finally falls silent? I don't ask you to answer now. I only ask you to stay with that question, because the answer, when it arrives, will probably be the start of something important in your life. Practicing Ma means deliberately creating empty spaces in your day, not as a luxury for when you have time to spare, but as a fundamental necessity, just as important as eating or sleeping. It means leaving times completely open in your calendar, without any plan, without any obligation. It means sitting in silence without looking for your phone. It means allowing for comfortable silences in a conversation without the urgency to fill them. These spaces are not wasted time. They are the time in which your mind digests what has been lived. They are the time in which your energy is restored. They are the time in which the most important ideas, the ones that cannot be born in the noise, finally find the opportunity to appear. And there is something else about Ma that I find extraordinarily relevant to modern life, something that I am going to tell you now, and that has to do with why you are more exhausted than you think. Your brain does not rest when you watch videos. It does not rest when you scroll through social networks. It does not rest when you listen to a podcast while walking. That is not rest. That is another type of stimulus. The brain truly rests in silence, in the absence of input, in Ma. And if you have gone years without giving yourself that type of genuine rest, if you have gone years substituting silence for constant entertainment, then you have a debt of neurological rest that no night of sleep is going to settle on its own. This explains something that you have probably noticed. You can sleep 8 hours, get out of bed, and still feel deeply tired. Not physical tiredness, mental tiredness, an exhaustion that comes from within and that no coffee manages to solve completely. Have you felt it? That exhaustion that has no name, but is always there. That is what happens when we deprive the brain of the void it needs to function well. But there is another layer to this problem. There is another weight we carry that is even more exhausting than the external noise, and has to do with something we carry inside, something that Japanese samurai identified centuries ago as the greatest source of human suffering. It is called the ego. Imagine that throughout your life you have been carrying armor, not of metal, an invisible armor, made of expectations, of projected image, of the version of yourself that you need the world to see and approve. An armor that you built piece by piece since you were little. Every time you learned that certain things about you were accepted and others were not. Every time you showed vulnerability and someone took advantage of it. Every time you failed and felt the gaze of disapproval from someone important, that armor has protected you. Do not doubt it. It has a real and valid function, but it also weighs enormously, and carrying it for decades exhausts in a way that very few things do. Japanese samurai were warriors. They wore real armor of iron and leather on the battlefield, and knew perfectly well the difference between putting on the armor when you need it and never taking it off. The warrior who never takes off his armor dies sooner in battle because his muscles atrophy, because he cannot sleep well. because his body adapts to the weight and loses the agility that keeps him alive. The ego works exactly the same. The samurai saw the ego as one of the heaviest burdens a human being can carry. They believed that when you act from the ego, from the need to protect your image and to be seen in a certain way, you are not acting from the truth. You are acting from fear. The fear of shame, the fear of rejection, the fear of not being enough. And acting from fear makes you take worse decisions, makes you spend enormous energy on things that do not matter, makes you turn every human interaction into a transaction where your value as a person is always under negotiation. There is a Japanese Buddhist concept called muga. It refers to the dissolution of that fixed self, of that rigid identity to which we cling with such force. It does not mean that you stop having a personality or values. It means that you stop building your well-being on the need for others to see you in a specific way. Let me ask you something very concrete. Now, how many decisions in your life do you take based on what others will say? Not the big decisions, the small ones. The clothes you choose, the restaurant you suggest, the opinion you express or do not express in a meeting, the hobby you have not started because you do not know if you would be good at it, and you are afraid that others will see you fail in the beginning. How much energy does that spend? How much mental space does that constant negotiation with the external gaze occupy? Here is what most impacted me when I truly understood the concept of muga. The paradox is that when you free yourself from the need to control how others see you, you do not become invisible, you do not disappear. On the contrary, you become more present, more authentic, more connected with the people who truly matter in your life, because you stop relating from the mask and start relating from who you really are. And relationships from authenticity are infinitely less exhausting than relationships from performance. But there is a specific sub-problem within this topic of the ego that I want to address before moving forward. One that especially affects people who seek to improve their life, who read personal development books, who listen to content like this. It is perfectionism. Perfectionism disguises itself as excellence, presents itself as if it were a virtue, but at its root, perfectionism is pure ego. The inability to tolerate others seeing you in the process, in the mistakes, in the learning. It is the need to show yourself only when you already have the impeccable result. And that need paralyzes you, makes you wait for the perfect moment that never arrives, makes you not start, because the result might not be at the height of the image you want to project. It makes you live in the imagined future instead of in the real present. The Zen masters had a practice that resolves it elegantly, and I will talk to you about it in detail later. But before there is another weight I need to name for you, one that is perhaps the most universal of all. There are two places where the human mind spends most of its time, and neither of them is now. The past with everything that should have been different, the words you said and wish you hadn't said, the decisions you made and about which you still doubt, the relationships that didn't end well, the mistakes that remain alive in your memory like wounds that don't quite heal, and the future with everything that could go wrong, the worries you manufacture before the problems even exist, the scenarios you build mentally, increasingly elaborate, increasingly threatening, the what if that becomes a labyrinth without an exit. The human mind can spend years, whole decades, divided between guilt for what happened and anxiety for what might happen. And in all that time, the present, the only moment where life really occurs, is left abandoned. Japanese Buddhists identified this with brutal clarity more than 1,000 years ago and built an entire practice around a single idea. The present is not the path to peace. The present is peace. It is not a pretty phrase to put on a wall. It is an operating instruction. When you are completely in the present, there is no guilt, because guilt lives in the past, and you are not there. There is no anxiety, because anxiety lives in the future, and you are not there either. There is only what is happening right now, and what is happening right now in most moments of daily life is perfectly manageable. But here is the practical problem I need to address. Because if I don't address it, all this remains as pretty theory that changes nothing. You cannot simply decide to be present. The mind does not work like that. If you say, I am going to be present, and you sit down to meditate, the first 5 minutes your mind is going to be in tomorrow's meeting or in the day before yesterday's argument. That is normal. That is what an untrained mind does. And telling yourself, don't think about that, does not work. Trying to suppress a thought amplifies it. It is like trying not to think about a pink elephant. Now you can't stop thinking about it. So how is the mind trained to be present? How do you learn to let go of the past and the future without repressing them with force? I'm going to give you the complete answer before we finish today. But first I need to tell you something about the nature of suffering that is going to completely change how you understand it. There is a distinction that Zen masters have taught for centuries, and that modern psychology has taken a long time to recognize. Pain and suffering are not the same. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Wait, before this sounds like a hollow motivational phrase, let me explain exactly what I mean, because when you understand it in depth, something important is going to settle in your mind. Pain is the sensation. It is the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, illness, failure, disappointment. It is what comes to you without you having asked for it. Pain is a completely natural and inevitable part of being alive. There is no way to have a full life without pain appearing at some point. There is no way to love without the risk of loss. There is no way to try without the risk of failure. Suffering, on the other hand, is what you do with the pain. It is the resistance. It is the "this should not be happening." It is the constant struggle against what is already a fact, the attempt to mentally rewrite a reality that already exists and is not going to change just because you do not accept it. There is an exercise that was taught to samurai warriors to understand this difference viscerally. Imagine you are holding a heavy bucket full of water with your arms extended. After a few minutes, the muscles start to burn. And if at that moment you tense against the pain, if you fight it mentally, if you wish strongly for it to stop, the exhaustion doubles. The mind amplifies the physical sensation, and collapse arrives much faster. But if at that same moment you relax the mind into the discomfort, if you observe it without fighting it, if you simply say, yes, this is happening, and it is fine that it is happening, the suffering decreases drastically, even if the physical pain is still present. This is the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is in the body or in the circumstance. Suffering is in the resistance. The Japanese have a phrase that sums this up in a way that I find extraordinarily honest. Shikata ganai, which could be translated as, it cannot be helped, or more poetically as it is what it is, not as passive resignation, not as giving up and doing nothing, but as an act of emotional clarity, as the capacity to distinguish with precision what is within your power to change and what is not, and to stop spending vital energy on fighting what you cannot change. Because there is something that nobody teaches us when we are little and that we pay very dearly for as adults. Most of the energy we spend in our daily lives is not spent on solving real problems. We spend it on resisting reality, on wishing things were different from how they are, on keeping alive the internal conflict between what is and what we think should be. And that is exhausting. It exhausts deeply in a way that leaves no visible mark, but accumulates over years. Here comes a question I want you to ask yourself tonight in silence when you are alone. Is there something in your life right now that you are fighting against? Something you cannot change, and yet you have not accepted. Something you have been resisting for a long time, wishing it were different, returning to mentally over and over again, as if by thinking about it so much you were going to find a way for the past to be different or for reality to give in. Do not judge it. Just name it, because naming it is the first step to letting go of the struggle. And letting go of the struggle does not mean you don't care. It means you decide to redirect that energy towards something you can change. And here is where I want to talk to you about something that the samurai developed into an art form, a mental state that I consider one of the greatest gifts any ancient philosophy has bequeathed to humanity. Have you ever met a person who seems serene in the middle of chaos? Not distant, not cold, not indifferent, but genuinely calm. A person who can receive bad news without collapsing, face uncertainty without panicking, listen to a criticism without getting defensive. How do they do it? Is it a natural gift that some have and others don't? Or is it something that can be learned, cultivated, trained? The samurai had a very clear answer to that question. It can be trained, and it has a name, Fudoshin. Fudoshin translates as the immovable mind. But I need to clarify what immovable means in this context, because it is easy to misunderstand it. Fudoshin does not mean being rigid. It does not mean being insensitive or lacking emotions. It does not mean becoming a stone that feels nothing. The samurai were human beings who loved, who suffered, who feared. Fudoshin did not eliminate their emotions. It transformed them. The image used to explain Fudoshin was that of an oak tree in a storm. Observe an oak during a violent storm. The wind howls, the branches shake violently, the leaves fly in all directions. Everything above is movement, turbulence, chaos. But the trunk remains firm, not because it is rigid, but because it has roots so deep that no wind can tear it out. That is Fudoshin, having roots so deep that external chaos cannot disturb you at your center. Most people function the other way around. Their internal state depends entirely on the external state. If the day goes well, they feel good. If the day goes poorly, they feel bad. If someone says something nice to them, their self-esteem rises. If someone criticizes them, their self-esteem falls. They are, in the language of the samurai, like ships without an anchor. The wind decides where they go. Fudoshin teaches you to be the anchor, not the ship. And there is a concrete practice that the samurai used to develop this. A practice you can start today without any special equipment and without it costing you anything. It is called the observation of the sky. The samurai meditated on this image. Imagine that your thoughts and emotions are the weather. Clouds of worry, storms of anger, rains of sadness, winds of anxiety. All that weather exists. All that weather is real. But you are not the weather. You are the sky. The sky does not fight the clouds. It does not rage at the rain. It does not try to hold onto the sun when it goes. The sky simply contains the weather, lets it pass, and remains exactly the same before and after every storm. When someone criticizes you harshly, The first automatic reaction is defensive. The ego activates, anger rises, the mind begins to build arguments, to look for counterattacks, to write responses in the internal theater. That is the weather. That is real. That is happening. But Fudoshin gives you the capacity to observe that reaction without being dragged by it, to see the anger as the weather it is without becoming it, to listen to the criticism from a deeper place where you can ask yourself with genuine curiosity, is there some truth in what they are telling me? Or is it just noise? That distinction, that fraction of a second of space between the stimulus and the response, is where all your freedom lives. And here is something I want you to understand well, because it is one of the most important points of everything I am going to tell you today. Fudoshin is not something you have or don't have. It is something that is cultivated with practice, with constancy, with small actions repeated over and over again through time, which leads me to the next principle, one that the Japanese have applied for centuries to transform entire lives, and that has to do with a simple but deeply counterintuitive mathematics. How many times in your life have you tried to change all at once? How many times have you made a radical decision on a Monday, full of energy and conviction, only to find yourself the following Thursday exactly where you started? Not because you are weak, not because you lack discipline, but because the human brain is not designed for radical and sudden change. It is designed for survival. And sudden change for the brain is a threat. It is uncertainty. It is abandonment of the known.